Hello listeners and viewers, welcome back to another video lesson. This is your tutor Abeni Tengoi. Today we will be doing a very interesting drama that is Ever Young, written by Alice Gerstenberg. Alice Gerstenberg, she was an American playwright and an actress, okay? And she is best remembered for her crucial role that she played in the foundation and success of several theater companies, as well as the Little Theater movement in Chicago. Ever Young, it is a one-act play that is set in the backdrop of 1920s. And at that time, several changes were happening in the country. This was due to the changing attitude towards the women in the society, okay? Now women, the working women had increased, has increased by as much as 25%, and women were also given the right to vote. So these were the changes that were taking place in the country at that time when this drama was, written. Now this play revolves around four women, okay, four old women that revolves around a conversation privy to their changes that was happening in the society. So they were sharing knowledge about the changes that were going on in the society, but that was secretly. All right. And now let me introduce you to the four main characters in the drama. The first one, we have Mrs. Phoebe Payne Dexter, Mrs. Agnes Dorchester, Mrs. William Blanchard, and Mrs. Caroline Courtney Page. These are the four main characters in the play. All right. And these are all of them are women, all right? They are old women, but they are thinking, all right? They are thinking, some of them here, especially Penny Dexter and Dorchester, both of them contrast in their idea, all right? In their idea about the society. Now let's have the setting of the play. The setting is in a hotel, all right? It's in a hotel, and the setting takes place in the corner of a lobby. Lobby, it's a space, all right, especially in the entrance of a public building where it leads to one or more rooms, all right. So we are introduced to Mrs. Payne Dexter and Mrs. Dorchester in the opening scene. We just have one scene only here. Mrs. Dorchester is a conventional character, okay? One who holds traditional values. But here Mrs. Payne Dexter, she's just the opposite of Dorchester. She is very fashionable. Though she's an old woman, she wants to stay young. She's trying very hard to look young or stay young, all right? And we are introduced to these first two characters here. In the opening scene, we will find them, both of them, discussing about the debutantes, all right? Debutantes are upper-class women, okay? Especially upper-class women who are making their first appearance in the society. Here in their conversation, Payne Dexter, she complains about how the debutantes used to be very rude to them, all right? She hates the debutantes because she is not happy with the privileges that the debutantes are enjoying now, because during their time, they did not get those privileges like smoking in public and then going out with anyone you want. Those were the privileges that the current debutantes are enjoying, and Penny Dexter is against that, okay? And as for Dorchester, she has no problem with anything, okay? But it is Mrs. Payne Dexter who has got problem. Every time, whenever she sees any debutant, she wants them to step aside and wants them to greet her like, "Good morning, Penny Dexter. Good afternoon, Penny Dexter." All right. So she always demands respect from the debutantes. As they were having their conversation, we have the entry of Mrs. Blanchard. So we have Mrs. William Blanchard. Mrs. Blanchard, she walks with the help of a walking cane, okay? And she is also an old woman. She is a divorcee, okay? She just had her divorce and she's celebrating her divorce. And why do you think so that she's celebrating her divorce after more than 40 years living with her husband? We will get to know that later, but right now, here, after Mrs. Blanchard enters the scene, she also starts complaining about how people used to help her. She don't like people helping her. She wants to be independent. Well, if people help her, she feels insulted, all right? She finds it rude. She don't want that sympathy from others, all right? Mrs. Blanchard has been reading a book called Truth and Youth. Okay, so in that book, it says that, our cells, the cells in our body, it renews after every 9 months. So even Mrs. Blanchard is not ready to accept herself that she's getting old. All right, she wants to stay young, and she tells the others that she is not more than 9 months old. All right. Like I've mentioned, Mrs. Blanchard is already a divorcee. Now, this is the reason why she got divorced from her husband. It so happened that right after marriage, 4 months after marriage, Mrs. Blanchard found out that her husband, that is Mr. Blanchard, was cheating on him, was, having an affair with another woman in the same set. And she felt she was totally shattered. She wanted to get divorced by that time. But at that time, women were not allowed to do such thing. They were supposed to keep quiet. They're not supposed to complain about anything about your husband. So she have to bear with that. But what happened was, there is this new character, okay? We have a new character here, Oliver Trent, but he does not appear on the stage, okay? Oliver Trent came to Mrs. Blanchard's rescue. So what happened? Oliver Trent and Mrs. Blanchard, they decided to arouse jealousy in Mr. Blanchard. And then their plan was to make Mr. Blanchard jealous, so that Mr. Blanchard will give up the woman and then come back to Mr. Blanchard. All right, that was the plan. And Oliver Trent was a young lieutenant, okay? A dashing young lieutenant. But in the process of making Mr. Blanchard jealous, Oliver Trent and Mrs. Blanchard, they fell in love. All right, they fell in love. So now Oliver Trent could not marry Mrs. Blanchard, because Mrs. Blanchard was already a married woman, and they cannot get married. So the only way to depart was, to post Oliver Trent as far away as China. And there in the Boxer Rebellion, Oliver Trent went missing. And even the government declared Oliver Trent as missing. And Mrs. Blanchard, she thought that Oliver Trent is dead. He's no more. But his spirit always keep on watching her. That is what she believed. And that is why she's able to stay young, believing that Oliver Trent's spirit is still watching over her. Then we have the entry of Mrs. Courtney Page, the fourth character, okay? Here, Mrs. Courtney Page, the fourth character in the play. The three women invites Mrs. Courtney Page to come and, have a talk with them to discuss about, husbands or any information, all right? So the three elderly women, they invite Mrs. Courtney Page to come and sit with them. Now, Mrs. Courtney Page is about 60 years of age, all right? And she has been engaged thrice, married once, widowed once, and currently she has a fiancé. Mrs. Courtney Page also got to know about Mrs. Blanchard's divorce, okay? And she told Mrs. Blanchard that she did the right thing, and she should be celebrating her divorce and then find someone again to fall in love. When Mrs. Blanchard was told about that, Mrs. Blanchard was shocked, Oh, good gracious, how can I find someone at this age? Then Courtney Page told her, why not? Look at me. I'm already, about 60, but currently I have a fiancé. Now we will get to know about how Mrs. Courtney Page, got engaged thrice but was married only once. It so happened that Mrs. Courtney Page has got 4 strands of pearls, okay, 4 strands of pearls. And she narrates the story how she got the pearls. The first pearl was given to her by her first fiancé, that is Harlow Bingham. But Harlow Bingham died in a horse race accident, okay? Okay, now the second fiancé gifted her the second pearl, okay? And that pearl was bought from India. She received the second pearl from her second fiancé, but unfortunately, even her second fiancé died of fever before their marriage. Now the third pearl was given to her by her husband, okay? Mr. Courtney Page. But even Mr. Courtney Page, he also died just a year ago, and Mrs. Courtney Page is mourning the death of her husband. But we can see that at present, she has got a fiancé. All right. Actually, Mrs. Courtney Page did not want to take the strand of pearls before their marriage, because they believe that pearls means tears. So she tells her fiance to gift her the pearl only after their marriage, all right? Because the first two pearls which she received before their marriage, all right? So she finds that it's kind of a superstitious, all right? Something very superstitious, that pearls bring tears. And now the fourth strand of pearls, which is the largest and the longest, okay, it is gifted to her by her current fiance, that is the new fiance that she has got now, all right? And it so happened that after the death of her husband, she felt very lonely, okay? She was very lonely that while in Paris during this autumn season, she picked the most eligible man in Paris. And there they found each other and they fell in love and they got engaged, okay? And the other three women, they were very excited. They were very curious to know who this new fiance is. They asked if he was a Frenchman, because they met in Paris, all right? They asked if he was a Frenchman, but she replied that he's not a Frenchman, but an American, all right? Courtney Page gives the details of her fiance, that he was an American and he's the president of the Australian mining company. Then these three women really wanted to know the name. And then Courtney Page revealed the name of her fiance, okay? And the name, that person was none other than Oliver Trent. Now here we get to know that Oliver Trent was not missing. Actually, he's alive. But here, Oliver Trent has already forgotten Mrs. Blanchard, and now he has already got a new fiancée. After getting to know about this Oliver Trent and Courtney Page, Mrs. Blanchard was shattered, because all this time she thought that Oliver Trent was dead, okay, and his spirit was watching over her. But this was all not true. She was totally shattered. But Mrs. Dorchester, she quickly came to the rescue of Mrs. Blanchard, all right? She stood up, and then from there she started saying, I remember. Remember what? She remembered that there was this locket, all right? In that locket, there was this blonde of hair, which was snipped off. And that was kind of a talisman, all right? That locket was with her. But what is this locket all about? Let me tell you about this locket. Mrs. Blanchard and Oliver Trent, before they split, okay? Before they split, they had a last meeting, okay? In that last meeting, Mrs. Blanchard, she snipped a, lock of her golden hair and gave it to Oliver Trent, so that wherever Oliver Trent goes, Oliver Trent will remember her, okay? So that very lock of hair, all right, which was put it in an amber watch or amber charm, was with Mrs. Dorchester. So Mrs. Blanchard was also very happy. Here Mrs. Dorchester explains how she got the amber locket. It seems she got the amber locket from her son, okay? And her son got it from a Chinese servant. And we have the Chinese servant who helped Oliver Trent smuggled from the Chinese, all right? Because he was taken prisoner by the Chinese, all right? There in the Boxer Rebellion. Now, Mrs. Courtney Page also got to know that Mrs. Blanchard and Oliver Trent, Mrs. Blanchard is still in love with Oliver Trent. So, Courtney Page decided to give the fourth strand of pearl to Mrs. Blanchard, because for her, the fourth strand of pearl was given to her by Oliver Trent, right? So, she decided that she will give away the fourth strand of pearl to Blanchard, okay? But Mrs. Blanchard is not ready to take the strand of pearls, but she is ready to take only the locket, all right, the talisman, the watch charm, all right. So she took it with both of her hands, and she told the other women to excuse her, and she went to her room. And while leaving, she forgot her walking stick, okay. Remember I told you that she used to walk with the help of a walking stick, right? So she left the walking stick, and then the other three women, they were astonished. They were saying, among themselves, look at her, she's just walking away without her walking cane. And they decided not to remind her. Now from here, because of this love, Mrs. Blanchard could walk now. The love that she had for Oliver Trent is still alive for her, okay? So now, she was able to walk because she got to know that Oliver Trent is alive now. And then she went to her room. And after she left, the three women, okay, the three women were still there, all right? And Payne Dexter, she asked Dorchester. She asked Dorchester whether the story was true or not. And here, Dorchester revealed that the story of the Chinese servant and how she got it from her son was all a made-up story. Okay, it never happened. It was just a made-up story to make Mrs. Blanchard feel good because she was dying from inside when she got to know that Oliver Trent was still alive, but she is now in love with Courtney Page. Okay, so Oliver Trent made up the story to make Blanchard feel good. All right. If that was a made-up story, how did Dorchester have the talisman with her or the watch charm with her? So now she tells the story that on her 21st birthday, it was her father who gave her a locket, okay? And then she also did the same thing. She snipped off her golden hair, all right, and she made it into a bracelet. It was actually hers, but she lied to Mrs. Blanchard that it was that same locket which she gave to Oliver Trent, okay? And this convinced Mrs. Blanchard that it was the same blonde of hair or the same watch charm which was given to Oliver Trent, all right? Then Courtney Page decided that she will also give up on her fiancé because she knows that Blanchard is still in love with Oliver Trent. So she decided to give up on Oliver Trent. And she is not ready now to marry Oliver Trent, okay? She decided to give up on him and then find someone new again. But for the pearl, she decided to keep it with her. She will not give back the pearls, but she will just give up on Oliver Trent and then find someone new, all right? Now, this play ends with the line, "Oh, to stay young, one must love." So if you want to stay young forever, you need to fall in love. That is what it tells us, all right? Because it makes us feel young. Falling in love makes us feel young. We have 4 women in the play. All of them are old women. All of them are in their 60s and 70s, but they are still, some of them, especially the 3 of them, excluding Dorchester, the 3 of them are still very sophisticated, all right? They're still very sophisticated and they are still, trying their best to look young, like the young debutants, all right? And here, because of the love story of Oliver Trent and Mrs. Blanchard, though Mrs. Blanchard was walking with the help of the walking cane, all right, now she could walk without her walking cane, and she was wanting to give away, give up that walking cane, but it was possible only through the love that she had for Oliver Trent. Actually, Oliver Trent turned out to be a flirt, okay? Oliver Trent does not love Mrs. Blanchard, okay? But these 3 women decided, to let Oliver Trent and Mrs. Blanchard to be together. So this is the end of our play. I hope you have understood and I hope you have enjoyed the drama. I'll see you in the next video lesson. Until then, stay safe.